Where in fact is Asia's underwear as well as her socks? I asked that thing in one of my last videos, and sorry about the sound. The sound was kind of off. But I'm trying to make this quickly. I'm repeating myself because I'm going to continue to ask this very question. Where is the young child's underwears and socks? And not only that, usually when children are trying to run away from home, wouldn't a child want to take everything with them? As in not their family belongings, but in fact their own belongings? See, because it's been known that when children pack, It's been known that when children pack, they really don't know properly how to pack unless they're told how to pack. As in, if they're going to spend the night over somebody's house, say as an adult, because remember, other children don't own homes. So to know how to properly pack something is to be kind of guided as well as led by, and in fact, an adult, as in carrying out the act of packing your own bag. And I say that because usually children, once again, when they're going to stay or spend the night over somebody's house, sometimes the children have a tendency to pack too much. And didn't I mention my own niece in that? When I said my niece, sometimes when she would come here, say for like the summertime, whenever throughout the year, just her bag would have so much stuff in the bag. My niece, let me see, when I go back in age, I think my niece was somewhere even before the age of 9. Even around the age of 9, my niece would in fact pack all her shoes. Let me tell you, that little girl, yes, my niece would in fact pack all her shoes to come stay with us, just sometimes even for the summer, or even just randomly sometimes when my mom will say, you know what, you want to come stay for the weekend? Though that's an 8.5, 9-hour drive. The little girl would in fact pack all her shoes. And it's been known that children in fact do that sort of thing. Because to be a young child in the first place and really love and adore the very thing that you have, as in your possessions, is to take all those things with you in a sense, or at least a high percentage of those things. Because remember, children in fact think differently than adults. We know there's no point of us taking all our possessions with us, as in the things that we wear, our clothing, because that's what I'm saying, the focus. When children are going places, sometimes is even stay somewhere. It could be going camping or anything, right? Any type of thing, because my aunt, she in fact does a lot of camping. So even her daughter has been known to pack too much. And so her mother had to take it upon herself to pull out items and say, you know what, that can't go. That can't go because of the simple fact of the cargo space within the RV or the van and the vehicle which they're taking. There's a weight limit to everything is what I'm trying to say, even in transporting a vehicle out on the campground somewhere. So, in me saying that, adults know that we are in fact coming back home, right? Possibly, if nothing tragic happened to even us, but we know and can sense, as in, don't take everything. We have a home. So our home is in fact where our personal possessions belong, and not completely with us everywhere we go. And yet a young child's mindset around the age of 8, 9, 10 years old doesn't properly think like that. When they say in fact, if a child is going to say run away or get away with somebody in a getaway car, that child would in fact take much more items than what was seen and presented on that list of the items which were in fact found in that bag, in that book bag. There will be a whole bunch of items, let me tell you, possibly much more, to the fact it will possibly drag the young girl down, because she would have packed so much possibly in that bag. The bag probably wouldn't even possibly been able to be closed, because once again, and more so dragged her down if she walked with those items in that book bag in the rain, because children do not think like us. They don't think proper like that because they have yet to be guided like that, to not take everything and in fact leave some things at home. This is your home in which your personal space in which you're going to in fact return to. So there's no need to pack everything. So to know and understand that a young child has that type of mindset, a young child in fact does not think specifically. Just to say, I'm going to take my favorite pair of jeans. I'm going to take a top to go with it. I'm going to take a vest. I'm going to go ahead and take possibly some black overalls and the other items included in that, as well as some church shoes, and then, oh, forget her own panties and socks. Children don't think that specifically. That's what I'm trying to say. The size of the complete matter for which it stands right here still is to know and understand, all aboard, that young child more than likely did not leave that house by herself. Police need to even check into what in fact happened that very night. Because to understand the backdrop, as in which I am in fact delivering right here, me standing here trying to figure out what in fact occurred with this young baby, is to know and understand young children don't think that specific. Once again, on top of that, leave her panties and socks out. That just came to me while I said, you know what? I took the dogs outside. I came back in the house. I said, you know what? Children don't think that specific. The only way a child could think that specific to put her favorite stuff in a bag and not put everything in the bag is to know somebody in fact did that for her, as in packing the bag. Because see, adults in fact claim the mindset of being very specific. There's logic even behind that, in the realm of specifically packing a bag of a child's favorite items. And yet I'm thinking and sensing logic was completely missing out, or maybe it wasn't, in the realm of where the little child's panties, underwear is, as well as her socks. See, there could in fact be a motive to play even behind that, in which the police is not even saying. Because as I said before, police are known to keep and guard certain information, and yet for that type of stuff to not be put out to the public, to the fact that young girls, O.J. Simpson had a sock. I had to take the time. See, I'm an inquisitive type mind. When I look at something and it don't look right and it don't smell right, as it's completely funky in the room of being off, it's to search and look around. How do police in fact investigate this properly? Let me go back and see, because it could have in fact been something before I didn't see or fully understand. So let me go back and see how police properly package items when they are in fact at a crime scene, how they properly walk within the crime scene. Because see, sometimes you can study something and let things bypass your eyes, as in not being aware, as complete unawareness, despite your learning and understanding certain things, right? And yet to gather pieces is to know by going back on the information. O.J. Simpson, because I was like, wait a minute, when I made that video, that the sound was bad, and I'm so upset. My apologies about that last video that I made. The sound should have been much more clearly, but possibly because I was banging the table. But anyway, I'm like, wait a minute. Who in fact, I had to jump on Google, who in fact did the police in previous cases not enter in to the database system, as well as allow public to know, not enter into the database system, because they do that as well, but not allow public to know that underwear was found and socks were found. Usually police, when they're doing their investigation, they release everything that was found, and not just say some clothes, as in pairs of favorite clothes. Usually if underwear stood with that, police will take it upon themselves to in fact release everything, because once again, that's part of evidence. The police is not going to take the time to etch out panties, as in a young child's underwear she wears up under her pants, as well as her socks. Because the police know, the FBI know, once again, in order to search and find, is to let the public know which items were in fact missing and which items were in fact there, just enough so that the public can paint a picture of what might in fact occur, so that the public can help out in awareness as in solving, fitting puzzle pieces together. And yet for the police to never really say, and yet for me to go and see for myself, as in the evidence presented on a blog where I was reading, yes, a legit blog, very legit. I don't want to call their name out because sometimes you don't do that, as in the individual, they might not feel comfortable with that. But to go on that blog in which everybody has visited and know, it's to say, once again, the panties and the socks could have not been there, because if they were there, they would have in fact been listed. And not only that, the police would have in fact stated that themselves, as in said so. To be a lonely drifter in the middle of the night is to in fact know that very thing could have not happened. Because even underneath that is sciences. It's sciences. That didn't happen. I know for a fact that did not happen. Listen to me when I say that. That did not happen. Because to go back on a child's list and know that a child mind thinks of everything, there is no child that is going to run far, far away from home and take it upon themselves to say, you know what, I'm going to leave the majority of my items as in belongings at home. Because remember, to want to leave a place you no longer want to be, and even to go somewhere in a car, as in a getaway car with whoever that tried to probably abduct her, even if a false promise was made. Say some grown man, random grown man, made a promise to this young child, I'm going to take you to somewhere lovely, or whatever these sick old perverts do, right? Whatever they do, whatever false promises, right, that they do. A young child was still think in the back of her mind, I'm leaving my house. And though they might have told her that they might in fact drop her off, as in take her home, right? That young child is still going to want to in fact pack a lot more stuff than what she packed. Listen to me when I say this. I'm repeating over and over because this is going to be the very question I continue to ask as I'm standing still right here, sitting in this chair. That child didn't pack her bag. Some devious, evil-minded individual possibly packed that bag, and even more so with their own hands. As in possibly wearing gloves or something like that. I'm thinking. Because how police do their investigation, yes, they comb for fibers, as in hair particles and hair matter and stuff like that. And seeing if gloves could have possibly touched something, right? But even in that, all of that is still questionable. How does a child want to just take it upon herself to go miles and miles away from home with some individual that she possibly known or may have not known, or just wanted to take it upon herself to just leave the house to get away from possible abuse? It's to still know and understand that child is going to want to take everything with her. Because to leave home is to know you might not come back if, say, you did it upon yourself, as in running away. If that young child thought out, once again, I'm repeating because to repeat is to issue clarity. Yes, it is. To want to run away, get away very far, is to know you yourself that if you plan that yourself, you know you might not be coming back, is what I'm saying. And so if the young child planned that herself, as in plotted it herself to leave home and never return, is to want to take a lot of things with her. Because those things are a piece of her. She ain't gonna want to take her bed, no. She ain't gonna want to take her dresser, no. She ain't gonna want to take her closet, no. She ain't gonna want to take her own home. And more than likely, she ain't gonna want to take no pictures, as no photographs, to represent the very thing of what she's trying to run away from. But she will take more clothing than anything. She will. Because once again, it bypasses a young child's mind, as in, say, a slip on, once again, you can't take everything with you. Can't take everything with you. I'm almost 40 years old, and sometimes when I go places, as in leave the state, I sometimes want to take everything with me. Mind you, I got 3 laptops to conduct business. And if I could, I would take all 3 with me, including the portable devices that go along with it. So believe me when I say this. And I know I said that adults most times know that they can't take everything with them. Adults themselves, yes, they know and understand this concept. But remember, to have too many favorite items, as in it being even a pet peeve yourself, is to want to, in fact, get on board somewhere and take all those favorite things with you. See, a child more than likely did not just have favorite clothing. She had other favorite items, is what I'm trying to say. And yet to not see any of those favorite items in the bag in which was packed and found by the contractor and given to police, is to say that in fact a setup was involved in this very thing that had went down, as in what took place as in play. That in fact is more than likely a setup, and it can't be nothing more beyond that. Trust me and believe me, that in fact is a setup. Because if I am an adult and you are in fact an adult, I want you to tell me, if somebody gave you a false promise to go somewhere, even on vacation, even if it's going on a cruise boat. My grandmother and my mom went on a cruise boat, right? My mom's suitcase was so packed, and you know how many days a cruise boat is, right? How many days long that a cruise ship, being on a cruise ship, lasts, right? So my mom's bag was a little bit too packed. My grandmother almost, right? But to know a fact that an adult thinks logically, and specifically to know that I'm going on a cruise ship, as in my mother and my grandmother, and I might have too many things, is to know I got to take certain things out, right? But we know children don't think like that. But to get on, say, a boat and have too many items in which you can barely carry, like my mom, she was struggling with her bag and even struggling to carry it, is to know even adults have favorite items in which they want to take. It's all type of items in which when we go somewhere with a bag, say to even spend 1 night or 2 nights, even 3 nights, to say that you're going to go somewhere is to know you're going to want very favorite things with you and not just clothes. Because see, some of us, I am an individual. I got my favorite clothes, right? But my iPod and my camera is more important than my clothes. And yet my clothes is the very thing I need to in fact cover me. That's a protection you layer. But some of us adults treasure those items, such as an iPod and camera, more so than our clothes. I drop everything let me tell you, I drop everything. If I was a young child that age, knowing how young children think, if I was an Asia degree, I would have dropped everything in the middle of that night to grab one of my favorite things, more so quicker than even my clothes, despite me packing some bag over a matter of days. Listen and understand how a mind thinks. If a adult has a logic mind enough to think specifically, as in putting specifics and stuff like that in their bag to say go somewhere, as I stated before, it's to know favorite items in fact are there. That young child bag was a little bit too vacant, if you ask me. I'm saying to say to possibly, if we was to conclude and say, well, Asia might have in fact ran away. Well, somebody promised her something about going somewhere, as on some little excursion or vacation. That bag was still a little bit too vacant. Because once again, many of us, if we could go on vacation somewhere, many of us would even want to take our own TV. Because favorite things are a very comforting thing is what I'm trying to say in leaving that far away from home. Even if it's not leaving that far away from home, it's some individuals that can't even go from one side of town to the other side of town without their favorite items being involved. And I myself can say that very thing. My iPod has in fact to be with me. I have to have something because see, my iPod comforts me. It does. I got Oprah Winfrey on there. I got all type of motivational speakers on my iPod. That's what I'm trying to say. And so I know sometimes my nerves can be a nervous wreck while I'm out in public. Yes, I have anxiety issues. So to know and understand that is to have something which is going to give me, in fact, comfort. And another reason why I took the time to scope out this Asia degree case is because there's, in fact, almost like-minded there in the realm of there's a lot of us that, in fact, are fearful in various things. Didn't I speak on that before? To have a fear of, say, just being randomly out at night. To have a fear of just irrational fears, period, enough to almost be timid in a sense at various times of day. I said that before, even that is often her story. No child is going to take it upon herself. That's the very reason of why I scoped this out. Because see, to have an irrational fear of, say, different things is to know you and that young individual. I myself, I have various irrational fears because I have anxiety. And I question of if I even have anxiety disorder, because sometimes to have a panic attack is to say, and yet sometimes not know that it's happening. I have them in my sleep. And so when you see fear as in somebody's story, a lot of times you know that you got fear yourself. You want to take the time to scope it out. If a young child got fear, like how I got fear, then why would she leave at night like that? That does not make sense, because see, my type of fear, it will come quickly. Sometimes when I don't know that it's happening, say a panic attack, I have those too. It could come upon me when I'm eating something that I don't know and I have an allergic reaction. And then I have full-blown panic attack. But then not only that, it can keep spiraling down. So to know that fear as is at play in my very own life is to come across a story of a child that has many irrational fears, and for me to want to take it upon myself to understand and know why does she come up missing, knowing that she has all these irrational fears. That's an issue in itself. Because look, to have irrational fears is to be shaken up at just about anything. I myself am completely shaken up by various things and not just one. Although I can be a very bold personality, that still does not allow fear to completely pass me. And so to be able to connect with this story is to try to understand, why would a child that has irrational fears, like I have irrational fears, take it upon herself to walk anywhere? Because see, to have an irrational fear is to get anxiety to going, is what I'm trying to say. And it's hard for that very thing to slow down unless, say, you got something to comfort you, which is why I in fact carry my iPod. So to know Asia Degree had irrational fears, as in a sense she could be timid at times, is to know in fact she had to have favorite items and not just her clothes. I'm saying even things to comfort her in the middle of the night. Because if a young child is afraid of the dark, then how was she sleeping at night, even late in the middle of the night? How was she sleeping even like that if she was afraid of the dark? I still question that, the afraid of the dark. That's an irrational fear. Most public people don't look at it like that, but yet it is what it is. It's in fact an irrational fear. My mom has that too, being afraid to sleep in the night time. Yes, she is. The woman has to have a light on or something on in the environment. So if Asia Degree was in fact afraid of the dark, how was she sleeping at night? Did her brother in fact give her comfort, say at night, to sleep in the dark, right? I'm saying not in a sexual mean, but knowing that a young child fears the dark is to once again stand and question. Because see, even police they're questioning, but I feel not enough, so I got to question myself. If the young child was fearful as in timid, afraid of the dark, then more than likely she didn't leave that house. But not only that, that would in fact as well pose a question, could that in fact have been why the young child was sleeping on the floor, as in next to O'Brien's bed, outside of possible molestation, even in the room of charges? Because the scope deeper underneath something is to try and figure out, as in to know, if a young child is in her room and she's afraid of the dark, as in timid, completely afraid of the dark, then why wouldn't a parent say set a nightlight in her room? Just enough to brighten up the atmosphere so that she can take it upon herself, in a sense, possibly to sleep in her own bed. And yet to not do that very thing, that in itself could pose the question of even abuse in itself. Because to bypass a child's needs, as in them being afraid of the dark, and you not putting a nightlight there, is to in fact impose that could in fact be abuse itself. Because once again, you're bypassing that child's needs, even a fear itself of the dark. And for you not to take the opportunity upon yourself to place a light there to make the child feel comforted, is to say you don't care about the child's well-being. Because see, for a child to lay in the bed at night and be afraid of the dark, and yet her parents possibly say if they force her to sleep in the dark, that's the play on a young child's mind. That's enough to freak her out. I'm saying at night. To not want her to lay in her bed and possibly go lay on the floor where her brother is, because she don't know what could get her in the dark. This is what I'm trying to say. See, people don't know how to fit pieces together. Anything could have been taking place in that bedroom, as we know, right? And yet for a young child to sleep next to her brother, it's to know that something else was going on, as involved in that. If, say, the young child wasn't being molested by the father or the brother, then something else was going on. The young child could possibly had a complete morbid fear of, say, the dark. Because children are in fact afraid of the boogeyman. So if you lay anywhere on the floor, it's to more than likely get out of your own bed, because some children will be afraid of the dark, although they know they got a brother in the room, and yet it's pitch black even in their bedroom. That's still enough to terrify them to want to pull the cover back over their head, as in cover their head in case the boogeyman comes too close. And yet some children, what they might in fact do is to go sleep on the floor next to their brother, because that comforts them. When there is darkness, as in the room being pitch black, and yet you know a child is afraid of the dark. If young Asia was afraid of the dark, as in timid of what could happen, go down, even in the middle of the night, because to lay in a room where it's dark in the middle of the night is to know possibly something can go down. That's how young children think. And so to prevent that sort of thing, it's to possibly what? Go lay next to your brother if you're not being molested by your brother. What happens in a young mind at 9 years old to think like that if there's no light, no night light plugged in? So if it's a possibility that, say, Asia was going to sleep on the floor next to her brother in the middle of the night when it's dark, right? Or even at night when they were supposed to be in bed, and say her parents closed the door, thought the children was going to sleep, and say she took it upon herself to go lay next to her brother on the floor, that's still to know something more was involved in that, as in the laying on the floor, even if she was just too terrified of the dark and there was no light around to be seen in that bedroom. And yet to comfort her nerves was to in fact possibly go lay next to her brother's bed. Because even a nightlight shines a room enough to make a child want to lay in their own bed. So did the police, as in the FBI, did they find any nightlight anywhere? I bet they possibly didn't even check on that. Because sometimes we could be so busy with stuff, even FBI and detective, we don't consider these sort of things. As in, if a child is afraid of the light, afraid of the night, she's not going to be afraid of the light, as in a possible switch, nightlight, being turned on and off so that the child can see her way even at night in her own bedroom. So that's why I'm saying this. If the young child was afraid to be in the dark, then my question still stands. Did the young child sleep in her bed in pitch black in the room? People need to question and observe this very thing of which I am asking. And yet no one has seemed to ask this question. And me being completely unafraid, although having anxiety issues, is still to take myself, as in put myself out there, bold enough to say that the young child, in fact, sleep in her own bedroom at night, even in the middle of the night with a nightlight. Because to shine light on the matter in which it stands is to know that something in fact is there which needs to be resolved, as in the manner. Who could have in fact put their hands even on a young child at, say, 9 years old? The question still stands. Because I said before, she could have been being molested, but yet and still, even when an adult leaves out the bedroom, in the middle of the night, say if an adult in fact molested this girl, say her dad, stepfather, whatever he was, say he was in fact putting his hands on that little girl, as in molesting her. He still has to take it upon himself to get up out of the room in the middle of the night and possibly close her door behind him. Right? So that will be a fact enough to leave some evidence somewhere and possibly on the floor, right? I'm not saying DNA, but to leave a young child. See, all this can go around. I can run circles around this whole thing to try to figure out a cause. Yes, I can. And possibly even come to the actual whereabouts, as in what had possibly happened. Because to run circles as in rings around some evidence or whatever have taken place is to run circles just around that very thing, to see what led up to what and what could possibly be what. The young child sleeping on the floor, there was something wrong there. There was something completely wrong there, and either if it was molestation, either her mom may or may have not known about that very thing if molestation was going down. Because see, even these mothers know that their husband or whoever is molesting their daughters and yet never speak up and say anything. Because that in itself could pose an issue of even them going to jail. Say if the father is found out to have been known to do that sort of things and police find out themselves, they will in fact lock not just the father up, but the mother as well. Because they put her well-being in harm's way is what I'm trying to tell you. And not only that, she picked the poor selection in men. And not only that, to marry somebody and be with them for a long time, however, as to in fact say, you more than likely didn't care about that child's whereabouts as well as well-being, even within the four walls of your house, if abuse was in fact going on in the form of physical or even sexual. So once again, was there a night light in young Asia Degree's room? Because see, if a young child is 9 years old and she's too timid and afraid to even sleep in her own room at night, it's to know she could have not made it outside. That's what I'm trying to tell you. Because remember, your room is your comfort zone. Your room helps out with your comfort level. Your room is a place, it's your own, what's the word for it? I don't want to say shrine. Your room is, some people's room is their very own palace. You feel like you're almost on top of the hill when you're in your room, right? Because your room, in a sense, contains you. So if your room contains you, as in calming your nerves from outside the four walls of your house. See, some people, even to get away from a long day of work or a long day of play or whatever, even children, is to know their room is in fact their sanctuary. You understand? A young child's room is more than likely their sanctuary. It helps calm them from fears. And yet to want to leave that is to know that something could in fact have been going down, as in wrong there. But not only that, if your room was in fact your sanctuary, and yet you could possibly have feared the dark in which your room was at night and even in the middle of the night, it's the question still stands. Why would a young child that could possibly fear the dark, even sleeping in her own room, although her brother is over to the side, if she fears that very thing, the dark, and not have a nightlight there, it's a no. Once again, she could have not left that house. Because who is going to take it upon themselves to say fear the dark and then fear sleeping in a room in the dark, although somebody is there in the room with them, and yet they're going to take it upon themselves to walk down individually down the highway at night? Something about that is wrong. As almost like an outing. Doesn't it seem like it's almost an outing, as an outing information in which it stands, in which I just said as in revealed? Because to look at a matter once again closely is to know even there's something there in which somebody is not telling in the four walls of the house. Why would a young child lay on the floor at night at that time, or at any time at night? She has a bed, despite it squeaking. If everybody got used to her bed squeaking, as in it just squeaking, with her tossing and turning, even if somebody told her, you know, your bed is too loud or stop. Because see, a brother would even possibly say it's nerve-wracking that bed squeaking, but he's not going to tell her, come over here, lay next to me on the floor while I lay in my own bed. A brother more than likely is not going to say that. See, because a brother would even be completely turned off if he heard his sister snoring, and yet he's trying to sleep because he's a light sleeper, right? But a brother still, if he got irritated at hearing her tossing and turning because he's a light sleeper and knowing that bed is squeaking, he might in fact say, Asia, stop squeaking the bed, right? But I still can't see her just getting up in the middle of the night. Still no sleepwalking, no. Not getting up and say I'm going to go over there and sleep next to O'Brien's bed, unless it was something more going down involved. That in a sense don't add up. Because see, with a girl, if her bed is constantly squeaking like that, and say her brother yell because he can't sleep with him being a light sleeper, stop squeaking the bed, Asia. If he's thinking that and he say it out his mouth, his parents will more than likely hear him. Because remember, supposedly being a tight-knit family, your rooms ain't that too far apart from each other. So even they will walk in the room and say quiet down or something like that. But not only that, the young girl would take it upon herself to listen to her brother about squeaking her bed and just lay next to her own bed. And yet, once again, I still think that whoever had an infatuation with the night, as in being out seen in the night air and sometimes not being seen out in the night air, was an individual possibly who had did this. As in possibly taken her as well as killed her. But not only that, they had to be the individual to pack that bag. Because if I'm a young child, even young children that fear the dark, even if they're abused, know more than likely they're going to want to take something more than just their favorite clothes to give them comfort. That's not enough comfort is what I'm trying to say. For a little girl to pack a bag over a matter of days, and I don't even think it was somebody on the outside that helped her pack it. So we can just void that out today in the here and now. Somebody more than likely in her house, in the four walls of that house, helped her pack that bag. I keep sensing that. And yet, if a young child is afraid as in timid of the dark, right, and everybody knows about it, and she was possibly maybe afraid to sleep in the dark in her own room, then why would she take it upon herself to creep out into the night air and not say take a stuffed toy, as in a stuffed animal? Because even 9-year-old children have certain dolls. I'm trying to pinpoint to that as well. Why was there no, because see, even when I was 9 years old, and even my niece is almost a teenager, and yet everybody was questioning why not at a teen, not my niece being almost near teenhood, but people was in question, and not her, but even other young individuals. Why are they still walking around with their dolls at 8 and 9 years old? Asia degree more than likely being a young timid individual, and some say, well, she might have had adult ways, but yet still a young child like that. Because see, I even have a cousin who is in fact my godchild that has adult ways at times, and even at 9 years old she was still playing with dolls. She was still playing with dolls, because trust and believe, even toys are enough to give you comfort in the middle of the night, even if you're laying in bed at night. A young child likes to have things, comforting things close to them when they are in fact in fear, as in not knowing what could possibly happen along the way, as in steps at night. A young child that is going to say, you know what, I'm going to run away, I'd unpack this bag for a few days, is still going to want something to represent comfort and helping her along those footsteps to where she could possibly meet somebody. And that more than likely is going to include like a doll. It's going to in fact include some type of toy. Because even when children pack, they take that very thing, a toy. It might not even be a doll, but it's something that gives them comfort, and it's a favorite item. And even if them taking footsteps in the middle of the night, they're going to want that thing where they're clenching and clutching it as they walk the street, timid, down the block. Because remember, you're a young child, 9 years old, afraid of the dark, possibly going to meet somebody, and anybody can snatch you on the way. And even a young 9-year-old knows that, even in trying to run away. Because see, a 9-year-old that fears the dark, as she's trying to supposedly meet an abductor, I don't think that happened, she's still going to be looking around everywhere. She's going to be looking around as she go, because she know that though somebody told her to meet them possibly, she knows she could still be snatched up on the way. I just can't see it. So even in that, she's going to take something, because more than likely when she left, she would have been somewhat fearful, because remember, she's going out into the dark. To go out into the dark and possibly may or may not see what you think you're going to see, it's a possibly never know as you start to begin to exit the door. So in order to comfort yourself, because more than likely your nerves are going to be rattled as in shaken before you even exit your door, because you are going into the night, that in itself could impose problems and you wanting to turn back around. Despite, say, an abductor could possibly gave her false promises of where they might in fact be going, a young child will still be nervous in the process, because she's not nervous to meet him or her, whoever set the situation up. She's nervous to meet that night alone. And yet, once again, the sciences is to understand at play what she could have in fact taken her out that front door. That's what I'm trying to get to. Once again, I'm repeating. To repeat is to pose a cycle of to listen closely to what could have in fact may or may not happen. A young child to leave out afraid of the dark, possibly afraid to sleep in her room at night and in the middle of the night, is going to be constantly shooken up to even walk out her door, despite her may trying to escape abuse. And yet she's going to want something to clutch onto, and not just her pocketbook, as in her Tweety Bird purse or whatever was stated on the list that was in fact found in that bag. She's going to want something else to clutch onto, in which children play with, such as child's play. Is that what they call it? When you clutch onto something, say as in a toy, that's to know in fact you are giving comfort. To go outside your comfort walls, as in the four walls of your house. See, a young child is going to say, once again, I got to take a toy with me. Mom and dad might in fact be abusing me, but I got to take something with me. Because see, even in abuse, sometimes if a child is being beaten on or sexually molested, some childs in fact have certain garment material, not just clothing, in which they clutch with them. It could be a blanket. Even 9-year-olds still hold on to even blankets from when they was babies, despite their mothers wanting to make them give it up, right? There's things that children clutch onto if, say, in fact, they're being abused. Let me see, if I'm a young child and say somebody kicked me, like a mother or father, or even a brother, and I'm enduring this abuse, that's going to make me timid enough to want to clutch on something even in the middle of the night, right? That's going to make me want to clutch on that very item even when I get ready to step foot out of the door halfway into the morning, which is in fact in the middle of the night. Because once again, to walk out and not see what's fully there, as in what's in front of you or possibly can be, such as the boogeyman, is to take something somewhat as a shield, right? And yet to not even have a coat on, and yet that young girl been going to school. I'm telling you, something is off about that. Because see, a young child would even know, oh, I'm terrified to go out at night right now, and yet I want to meet such and such who made the false promise, that whatever promise they made, and yet a young child is not going to know it's a false promise if it came from an abductor being abducted. And yet even a child is going to want to be shielded. As in, say, not just taking a doll, but say possibly leaving a doll at home and exchanging that very thing for a coat. Because see, children that fear the dark like to be shielded. That's what I'm trying to say. And yet to not be shielded by a coat is to possibly want to know and understand to turn around and go back home. Young children, in fact, think like that. Because remember, to sleep in the dark or anywhere and you are afraid of the dark is to, in fact, possibly pull the covers over your head. And yet to take it upon yourself to go meet somebody in the middle of the night is to pull a cover over you that could possibly protect you. And that in itself is, in fact, a coat. If not a doll, then in fact a coat. So nowhere is any items being spoken of what this child was using to say comfort and protect her at times and when she feared the dark. Why isn't that? Because see, even some children, even older than her, had certain things which put them to comfort. And yet when they came up missing or whatever, the parents got on whatever TV show and spoke of that. She always loved to have her such and such. She always loved to have this with her. She always loved to have that, because remember, that's a favorite item, which in fact brings comfort. And yet for Asia Degree to not have any of these items as something to comfort her, such as a toy or even a coat to protect her from what could possibly snatch her up, as in a covering to put a coat on as a covering in itself. If you fear something, more than likely, and even with the weather, what it was, a young child would even think, what if somebody snatched me before I get to where I'm going? A timid individual. So they will want to put on a coat with a hood. Because even the hood could, in a sense, bring them some comfort as they're walking their way so many miles down the block to meet whoever. They know that hood is the same type of hood in which a child will pull a blanket over their head to not possibly see the boogeyman in the middle of the night, right? I'm thinking. Because even a hood on a coat is comforting in itself for a young child that fears the dark. It helps them to not see what is all around them and just focus forward. Because remember, once a hood is pulled over your head, see, a child that is afraid of the dark is not, in a sense, she's gonna be fearful enough, right? But she still more than likely is not going to leave her hood off because it's dark. Remember, it's dark. She wants as much protection as she can, enough to shield her, to get her to her destination. And so she's not going to pull her hat off, more than likely, to be possibly trying to look around. She may, but more than likely she might put that hood back on, because to have as much layers on is to protect you, even from the elements themselves outside and what you're going into to meet somebody. And yet to know all items was in fact not theirs, to know somebody set that up. That's a part of the case as well. It has to be. Because ain't no grown man or woman gonna walk outside in that type of cold air. It was 38 degrees here the other day where I'm at. And I said, oh, you know what? I got to get back in. I wanted to test to see how I actually felt out there while it was raining, not drenching, but raining, being in that coldness. I've been out there in that type of coldness before, and it's something you don't want to feel. It's pure hell. To be a grown adult body to go out in that temperature with no coat on, and though it's mildly raining, and yet she was drenched. That's enough to freeze almost to death. I'm saying for a young body, that's almost like hypothermia or something like that. When body temperature starts to drop or something because it's so cold outside, your body can't take it because see, water pressure on top of that, as in raindrops coming down real heavy, blasting you, that poses the issue of hypothermia. And yet to see and understand that that could have in fact not take place, as in a body would have in fact been found on the side of the road that say some passed by her just drifting along enough to see somebody has in fact just completely clonked out, as in died on the side of the road because of hypothermia. Being too cold, that's almost coming close to frostbitten. Yes, it is. A young body meeting the rain in that very cold temperature. So once again, who packed this young child's bag, as in folding her clothes neatly for her? Children usually just throw stuff in the bag, not neatly. At that age of 9 years old, they don't really precisely fold clothing. And not only that, why didn't a young child take a favorite item with her outside of some clothes? Because that's bare. That's completely bare. You can't tell me, see, can't nobody tell me that that's not bare. That in itself is bare. That in almost sense points to the child has no heart to not take something which is her favorite item. You got to listen to an example, as I stated, for what it is. A young child that has a heart, say for even Valentine's Day, is going to in fact take something which does not set her comfort level off. Or possibly she's going to take something that in fact makes her feel comforted, with whether it's a doll or a toy. Now rewinding again, repeating, for that very item to not be there is to know this story is completely bare, as in no love involved. Because to take it upon yourself to kill somebody like that, if she's killed, or even abduct her, is to know that love could more than likely have not been involved even on Valentine's Day. And yet even some family members act to claim to show that they love some people in their family, even their own children, and sometimes don't. Saying the false fake front, you never know. I was thinking like, man, don't usually when a child pack her bag, don't she just get to getting too much far ahead of herself? Seriously, children pack bags, man. A lot of them had too many favorite things, especially at 9 years old. There's so many favorite things they can't even fit into the bag. But if an adult directed you or guided you, that's still to say that something is still going to more than likely be slipped into that bag by that young child. Listen to me and hear me out when I say this. Despite a young child supposedly being snatched by an abductor, as in the abduction, is to still know she's going to take the time to sneak a favorite toy item into that bag. Because remember, she sneaked everything else, supposedly. If a young child is going to take it upon herself to listen to somebody else guide her to sneak some items in a bag over a matter of days, is to know more than likely there's more detail involved, as in her more than likely going to sneak a toy in that very same bag. Because remember, she snuck everything else, supposedly. I don't even think she did that. Let a story tell on itself, I'm saying. Let it play out, because as I start to go more along, I'm going to start to unravel that bag. As I'm standing here, as in trying to go in it, as in seeing what in fact took place even that night. I want to know what in fact took place that night, because I feel that the parents, there's more that could have in fact occurred in which they're not telling. And I said that how many times? And yet you can slowly unravel a bag, as in piece by piece, in the form of even missing items. To know that no toy was in fact there, as in a toy, a favorite item of a child, is to know in fact it wasn't there. As in another missing piece, as in a link. In relation to, say, a possible motive, as in somebody supposedly being picked up. Nothing makes sense. You didn't wear a coat at night, young Asia. That's my question. You didn't wear a coat, although it's almost being frostbite area of where you're surrounded. The rain, meaning cold weather. In that form of fashion is hypothermia, which awaits you, and even that, you didn't take a coat. Not only that, the police didn't say whether the bag was completely drenched. Not only that, the detail on that paperwork of her name being found, as in it, could the water have in fact met that paperwork of her name being found on that paper? Was it written in pen or was it written in pencil? And more than likely for that paperwork to meet rain particles is to in fact know that piece of paper would have in fact be smudgy, as in smudge material, as in rain meeting written information on a paper, more than likely bleeding off that paper if too much rain has in fact met that very thing in that bag, her book bag, despite it being guarded by, say, garbage bags. Because once again, for garbage bags to be found on that book bag is to know those garbage bags came later, possibly. I'm thinking the garbage bags more than likely came later on in relation to being put over that bag to shield and conceal the information in the bag. And yet once again, to walk in the rain at that time of day in that type of rain is to know your very items in that bag is going to in fact be drenched, as well as that piece of paper that held that information of your name as well as your number, because once again, that's in fact identification. It's identification is what I'm trying to say, right? And so if that information was not in fact wet, then more than likely the young individual had to be in somebody's car, right? She had to be in somebody's car shielded away from wetness. And yet for eyewitnesses to say that they seen a young individual, it's to know they possibly could have not seen that individual, and that in itself might in fact have been a setup as well. You never know. Because for items to meet rain, even a piece of paper as an identification of who this individual is, for that piece of paper to not have been wet, is to know whoever did this to this individual knew her personally, as well as put her name on there, and that not in fact be that young child's signature, as in handwritten information. The child more than likely didn't write that. Some adult wrote that. But once again, if it's not wet, then more than likely she wasn't out in the rain. Could she have in fact been killed at home? I'm asking that question. And yet that bag been placed there. Because if a bag is not wet and the garments are not wet, and yet the detail on the bag is not written in her style of writing, as an Asia style of writing, is to know somebody in fact took the time to write that information themselves. Unless, say, the parent, when they bought the book bag, usually parents, when they buy a book bag, as in set the book bag up for the child when they first get the book bag, years before, a year before, however a parent buy a bag, sometimes that very parent write that information on that piece of paper and put it in the bag in that plastic tab inside the book bag. Some book bags have that type of thing set up in the bag where you can write the child's name in pen and paper, where it says name, address, phone number. Those type of things, in fact, sit in certain book bags. And yet, once again, for the police to not completely say what type of paper material this child's information was on is to still not know. Even an investigation, the public, as in trying to find out, because even that in itself can help the public try to fit unsized pieces together. How was her name written in the bag? Was it just on a piece of paper with the number? Or was her name and everything written on that piece of paper, which goes inside of a child's bag when you buy the bag? That little piece that's in plastic. Some bags have those and other bags don't. I vaguely remember. But once again, her undergarments missing. That in itself could provide a missing link. What child does not take the time to pack her undergarments, as in her panties and her sock, knowing she going somewhere, and she been wearing that thing since possibly after the age of 1.5 years old, going in a 2-year-old, however long the young child was potty trained. See, even some children remember that. Some don't, as in the potty train, how long they've been potty trained for. But to wear panties for so many years, going into almost 10 years, is to know you don't forget that thing when you pack. Children don't oftentimes forget that because it's a habit. It's a habit. That's why I question who was and I'm gonna make another video. When it came to the young child, say, okay, let me think. When it came to the young child packing her clothes, no, not packing her clothes. I asked that already. When it came to the young child even dressing herself, who was a part of that process? I know the mother and father was sometimes gone or whatever their whereabouts was in the daytime, in the middle of the night, creeping around, whatever going on with that family. But even in dressing herself, you got to question that as well in the realm in relation to her panties, because I said before, to wear a pair of panties is to not see a pair of panties one time, but to see it twice. Because remember, to take a bath at night is to take off some dirty panties, as in put them on the floor so your parents or whoever can pick them up, or you put them in a dirty basket, them dirty panties, so you can get in the bathtub of clean water. And then once you out, you dry off, and then you put on a new set of clean panties. So a child to see that twice in one night is to never forget her own panties. It's to never forget her own panties, and more than likely her socks as well, because those two go together. Those twos are usually put on at the same time. Yes, they are. And so to ask who would in fact get the child's school clothes ready is what I'm in question of. That's going to be my next video. Who helps the child get her school clothes together? As in the next day, because if you don't wake up and say you just take a shower, if you take a bath at night, then more than likely you might not take a shower in the morning. Some people, in fact, wash up in the morning, as in their face, their ears, brush their teeth, and all that other stuff, and possibly rewash their privates or whatnot. But sometimes they don't take their socks off, and sometimes they don't change their underwear, because remember, they already changed them that night before, right? But still, somebody had to set up the process of you even getting dressed that very morning, even the morning before, and even for years on end, as in helping to place your clothes there. Because if a 9-year-old can't run her own bath, then more than likely somebody else was setting her clothes out, as in relation to wear the following morning. Doesn't that make sense? I'm saying it all add up. If you are not, I'm not saying wise, but if you're too young to say, if your parents or whoever think that you're too young to possibly run your own bath water, I feel in a sense I said that these individuals could have in fact been the same one to set up this whole ordeal, the people who packed the bag. But still, you have to question who was setting out the clothes for the young girl for her to get dressed the next morning or any morning. Because if she's not allowed to place her hand on the knobs enough to touch it to turn the water on her own bath water, then that's enough to say that she wasn't allowed to dress herself, as in possibly not being allowed to pick out her own clothes. Because some parents even go that far in the realm of protection. Because I said before, they think that you stand in the way, and you even doing that because parents a lot of times think that you're not going to do it properly. So that's still my question. If she couldn't take a bath, turn a knob on, stand there still, wait for the water to run, and then turn it off while she's in the bathtub, or even say, just stand outside of the bathtub, turn the water on, and let it run, and then wait till it stops. Because see, even a parent will guide you in that, to say, you know what, you don't run bath water and stand in the bathtub, because you could actually slip and fall with that. So what you need to do is, if you're going to run your bath water, young child, you stand on the outside, turn the knobs, turn the water on, wait for it to actually flow, as in fill up the tub, and then you get in. Then you get in. But if that sort of thing is not done right, as in a child doing it herself, then that in a sense can pose problems of a child in fact drowning. I paused for a minute because even that came to my mind. Even that came to my mind, because I'm like, that's really, I need to make a video about that. Was the mom in fact running a bath water as she said that she run a bath water? Or could young Asia have in fact ran a bath water herself, or a situation happened where she drowned in the bathtub? And could that have been an accident? I don't think even that could possibly happen, but it's still a question. You want to question everything, not just small bits and pieces here. Could the child have in fact, say, possibly took it upon herself that night to run her own bath water, say somewhat slip and fell in the bath, possibly banged her head and then drowned? Or say the parents, I don't know, something possibly with that, and then to cover it up, say if that was an accident, to make look like they had nothing to do with that. Because see, some people even fear being prosecuted with even that accidents. But I still don't think that was at play, but it was still a good question. It was still a good question. It just popped up in my head. So you were not old enough to run your own bath water, which mean in a sense you possibly wasn't old enough to even pick your own clothes. Somebody had to be putting them items together for you. I'm thinking, because see, even clothing have to be ironed even before going to school, even if they're done the night before. If a child is not allowed to make her own bath water, then she possibly is not allowed to pick out her own clothes, although she could know would in fact go together. A parent that wouldn't allow her to run her own bath water would in fact pick that child's clothing out for her. And not only that, the parent will possibly iron the child's clothes the night before, or the day before, or the evening. I'm thinking the evening before. A parent would in fact iron a child's clothes the evening before, say when they got off to work, so that the clothing is ironed for the child to go to school the next day. Something is completely off right here. Because if you're not allowed to say pack your own stuff, hold on, wait. If you're not allowed to say run your own bath water, that's to know that more than likely you're not allowed to possibly say dress your own stuff, because kids can't be sent to school with their clothes wrinkled. I said that before. That's a representation of mom and dad sending a child to school wrinkled, because if a child is taking upon herself to pick out her own clothes, those same clothes still have to be ironed by somebody within the four walls of the house. The clothes have to be ironed, because even a parent will be shook up to the simple fact that the teacher or whoever mentioned, or another child mentioned, that the fact that the clothes was completely wrinkled, as in going to school the next day, any day, and not just that day on Valentine's Day. Though she didn't make it to school, I'm just giving an example. So to know all of this, to know that parents like you to be neat, it's to know more than likely they wouldn't have wanted you to just pack your own bag. Or could they have? Say if a parent took it upon themselves to say iron her clothes, that still don't make sense though. Depending on how neatly folded the clothes was, and even if they had a crease in them. Because even people was wearing creases back then. People didn't start wearing creases on their clothes until more recently. This is 2018. 2018, so a few years back, people started wearing creases. But if the bag was packed too neatly, as in how her clothes was folded, then once again, that's to know that an adult folded those clothes. And not only that, I'm wondering the timing. Something is telling me, not something is telling me, but you know how stuff pop in your mind, my mind. As I go along, I think more and more to etch out the timing being off, as in the situation, that whole situation, as in the timing being completely off. The timing in that, whatever happened that night, as in the family timing, is all over the place. It's all over the place. But once again, to iron a young child's clothes and say hand her those clothes to put in that bag, is to know more than likely an adult would have taken the clothes, ironed the clothes, folded the clothes up neatly, and told the child to put the clothes in that bag in that same form of fashion, just as they're given to the child, is what I'm trying to say. Hand to hand, foot to mouth type of ordeal where you're just ironing right then as a child is standing somewhere in the environment with you, and you just took it upon yourself to iron her clothes. But even that is not, that's still out of place. My timing is off. That was probably why I said the timing. But still, that could still happen. That in itself could still happen. Because to do something over a matter of days is to be guided in doing it, even in packing things neatly, after somebody has taken the time to iron their clothes. See, the police should have said whether the individual items were in fact ironed or creased or neatly packed. Those are specifics enough to make an examination to see, as in delve deeper. If an adult iron your clothes and you are a child in the environment and you're being guided to say pack these things in the bag, and you're guided by that adult, more than likely your bag is going to be packed very neatly. And not only that, folded very neatly, because to after iron something is to be given those same things by an adult who took the time to fold it themselves. And not only that, they directed and guided you how to put each thing in the bag as you're going over a matter of days to go somewhere. That's what I keep thinking in sense, and I could be completely wrong. But depending, once again, because you got to be police to look at how neat the bag was packed. Because for something to be neatly packed, as in pressed and packed, it's to know a child might have not in fact packed it herself. Because remember, too much neatness is involved. And young hands like that, they don't really handle proper neatness in that form, even if directed. They start putting stuff here in the bag and putting stuff there, although they were guided and directed, which is why I'll pose the question of if that individual was there with them, as in standing side by side as they did it, packing the bag as they went along over the matter of days. Because to do something right, as in plan it right, is to remain undiscovered in the form of thinking a child has done it, when in fact the adult might have did that thing. And yet, once again, to incite fear in a young child is even to make that young child do it right, as in packing a bag. I always be thinking about fear. To even incite fear in a child is to make them pack the bag right, as you're guiding them. Because if too much care was given to that bag, then that's to know that somebody might have in fact incited fear in that child, as in made them timid in doing it, as in packing it correctly. The police scope that part out. So no precipitation was there in the form and fashion that it was precipitation in the middle of the night. I still keep sensing you're not going anywhere, child. Like, I don't know why that is. I could be completely off. And even that. Because doesn't precipitation play out even in the middle of the night at that time? And yet, once again, to incite fear in the individual is to make them do it right, even hand to hand. Even handing somebody some garments, as such as some clothing and even favorite items. It's to be done right, as in nothing out of place, despite something being completely missing in the bag, such as panties and socks. Because even adult individuals, let me think. If an adult individual was taking the time to do a setup, more than likely, I said before, they wouldn't want panties there, because to put panties there is to trace it out for DNA, as in sperm matter. Yes, crime lab, crime evidence, crime, whatever you want to call it. if a adult took the time to do that and say they was in the four walls of the house or something crazy, because you got crazy parents. Got a question. Look at Case. What's her name? Casey Anthony. Is that her name? The young girl that killed her baby. So to not place panties in the bag is to know in fact that those panties could be scoped out in the realm of DNA, as in it being questionable, right? And yet to take those panties out is to not be able to search around and look around, as in the police scoping out that very DNA that could be found possibly in a little girl's underwear in her bag, because once again, that sort of thing I don't think can be completely washed out by even a washer or dryer. And yet a dryer might completely kill some sperm DNA, but not possibly completely, I don't think, despite the heat. You never know. And yet to pull socks away is to make it less obvious that the panties are in fact gone. I'm thinking, wouldn't you think, if say somebody was molesting that child in the house and say they killed her on purpose or killed her accidentally or something, sperm could have in fact been in the young girl's genitalia area, as in the markings on her underwear, which could possibly be found even in the track and trace of DNA. Police scoping that out in a crime lab, despite the panties possibly going through the washer machine and even the dryer. Still, I think possibly a black light could even pull that up. The crime light, black UV light, could possibly even pull that up, despite a young child's underwear going through a heat cycle, right? With that. But not only that, if you're an adult and you don't want, say, something like that to be found, then you will pull that out of the evidence, as in the panties, the young child's underwear. But to make it less obvious that you pulled the panties out is to, in fact, pull the socks with it. You got to think. You got to think properly. I'm thinking. Because, see, I'm a writer. That's why it's so easy for me to just think as I go. Because to be a writer is to look at everything at all angles and not just look at something straightforward like I'm looking at this camera. Writers, we see things from all broad perspectives as well as small perspectives, but just enough to know to look at all angles. And not just be looking at the full picture of how it was presented to mass media. We go all the way in. Yes, we do, writers. Yes, we do. We start pulling information because, once again, to be a writer is to, in fact, pinpoint information. That's the point in the zone of being a writer. That's what I'm trying to say. So, if you're guilty of something, say even the form or fashion of sperm, as in getting off even in the middle of the night, say with a young child, such as an Asia degree, getting off with her in the middle of the night, it's to know that sperm could possibly be there. And yet, even if her death took place in the four walls of that house, it's to possibly pull out the DNA away from the evidence and the realm of even panties. Because I mentioned the washer and dryer for a reason. Heat is known to kill some things, and yet sometimes not even sperm. Sperm is bold enough to live through all type of things, let me tell you. Sperm, yes it is. So, even possibly heat. And so, it could possibly, you could put something through a washer, it somewhat wash out the contents, and yet notice when you open a washer or even a dryer how you pull out something and yet it's still half clean. As in, there's still matter there in which you take it upon yourself to say, you know what, dang it, I need to rewash this because the washer didn't even wash all this properly. And not only that, to open the dryer and find that very thing is to know you might need to, in fact, reload the machine again, as in the washer, because all the particles has not been washed out, such as dirt, film matter, whatever. So some people put their clothes back in where stuff is found on their clothes despite them washing it enough to be clean, and yet still stuff is there. It's to say, if a person was in her home environment touching on her or doing stuff like that, that matter would in fact be on her panties. And once again, to not be able to trace as and scope that in the evidence is to pull that out of the bag. If you're going to plant a bag somewhere to be found somewhere by even police, or even if you're going to get rid of that bag to never be found. Because you know, in fact, that bag could possibly be found, and yet to have your semen on that very thing is to be traced back to you, the individual. So to prevent that from happening is to possibly get rid of that underwear, as in pull it out of the picture. And not only that, two and two go together, as in panties goes with socks. And so to make that thing less obvious in the crime details, to pull out the socks as well, so that it can't be read. Because if socks are left into a bag and yet panties are not, it's to know that something is in fact wrong with this picture. Once again, I'm saying in relation to ID identification. If a bag was packed and say everybody want to think a young child packed that bag and say her socks was there and yet her panties was there, is to know in fact something could have possibly went wrong, as it went down in that household, in the realm of them not telling, right? And yet for two missing articles which go together to be missing, is to know something is in fact wrong, that the family is not speaking on. Because why would a young child not pack two things that go together in which she see twice within a day? To take a bath is to see panties and socks twice a day. Yes, it is. It's enough to see it that it's once ingrained in your memory, is burned into your memory enough to not forget it. And yet you take it upon yourself to in fact pack 3 family photos. Something wrong with the picture. Something wrong with this whole element. It's off, and even that's a science. To be able to read into something as deep as I am is to know that I got a science-like mindset enough to see those very things, of which it stand as in it being off. Even in the field of acute vision, of being able to see, a keen awareness. Where's her socks and where's her underwear? But more than anything, if you want to say forget the socks, this is not an O.J. Simpson case, right? In the realm of finding DNA on a sock. Because supposedly you can find that even on a young child's sock if she was to step into a car. Yes, I studied those type of things and how the fibers get up on the sock. And even a police can trace even that back. Say if an individual was to take her and kill her and then scope out her clothing and all that other stuff. But the panties is more important than the socks. Yes, they are. Because see, a young child, a young girl, matter of fact, will be more willing to walk around with no socks in her shoes more quickly than she would go in a day without her panties. Because to stand and meet and greet panties too many times in the day is to never forget those very things. Because even there's a feeling in that. To put on panties too many times in a day, as well as, take them off, it's to know that very thing has been close to your body. It's a bodily sensation which has been burnt into your memory as well. You got to understand the sciences. Even in the realm of psychology, scoping things out. If I feel panties are close to my body twice in a day, taking them off and putting them back on, that's to know I can't forget those things. Even in me packing a bag, I will more than likely never forget those things. I'm more likely to have been around panties too much as a young child and take them off and put them on before a bath as this young child did, is to know she will remember those very panties and her socks possibly more so than she will remember her favorite items. Because remember, they're close to her body. That's common sense logic of if I put on something, I can feel that very thing. Because remember, favorite clothes go on top of undergarments. Your favorite clothing. Even that Tweety Bird purse or whatever, the Tweety Bird overalls, I think I seen in the findings of her clothing that was in the book bag on the blog that I was on. Favorite items as a favorite clothing go on top of panties and socks. And yet for this to totally, completely slip a young child's mind, such as panties not being there and socks not being there, is to know something else happened. As in there's something more to the story. I know I'm repeating again. And yet there's more to this situation completely. It's completely, let me tell you, there's more to this situation which is not being told, as in completely unspoken of. Because to use your common sense and logic, as in reasoning skills, is to read the very thing for what it is. I mean, that child done took the time to get in some clean bath water after taking off dirty panties and dirty socks to only get out some water to meet some clean, fresh panties and socks. And not only that, a towel after bathing off dirt and grime and whatever from your body, right? And you're gonna really forget those very things. You're gonna really forget those things. Because see, that young child have in fact seen those panties and socks more so than her favorite clothing. Because remember, children a lot of times might have a full wardrobe, but that don't mean every article in her wardrobe is her favorite thing to wear every single day of the day. Single day of the day, right? Just because you have a wardrobe don't mean everything in it is your favorite thing to wear. And so there could be things in which you don't really like to wear and yet you're forced to wear it anyway, right? Because parents think like that, to just dress their kids. You're not, young child, I'm dressing you. You're not going to tell me what you ain't or are going to wear, right? And yet to know and understand even that, the possibility underneath that could stand the reason for things wanting to be preserved. The reason and the wanting of things to be preserved, even in that. See, to say too many things out loud is to, in fact, send out a guilt trip to somebody that's, in fact, responsible for this thing, which is why I'm making these videos. It's to not make person feel shame. No, it's not. And all this devastation and turmoil, we all feel that, right? The devastation and the turmoil of what could possibly have happened. And yet to once again send the guilt trip out is to know, to let the people know that you are in fact now in the zone of unraveling the bag, in the mission of what was a point and purpose, well as fact, in preserving this bag. I myself have a scientific nature and nothing more than that. Because to represent all details in the bold form and fashion in which I am doing is still to let the public know something is off and something is wrong, even in the house. So a little girl just says, you know, I meet my panties every single day. I meet my panties multiple times a day. And not only that, I meet my socks multiple times a day. They're not my favorite items, and yet I'm so used to it. It became a habit for me to put these things on, and yet to not pack on any of it in a bag. It's to say, what, forget? But how could you forget meeting it that many times? It's not a child's logic, I'm saying. Because see, children do stuff by habit. There's no leaving anything out when it comes to a child doing stuff by habit. Because see, some of these children are so prone to do stuff by habit, they feel uncomfortable doing things outside of habit. I'm saying it gives them reassurance to do things based upon habit. Asia Degree more than likely had a timetable of when to eat her breakfast, just as much as she had a timetable when to leave out that front door to go to school. To do things in habit is to provide reassurance. Listen to me when I say this. And yet, to break a young child out of their habit is enough to pose a tantrum. Children sometimes have what is it? Tantrums, but there's another word before the tantrums. Children break any young small child at that age out of their habit, out of their routine, and see how it go. They completely lose their mind. They might even fall to the floor like a young baby and just completely break out in full-blown tears because you're breaking them out of their habit. That's their comfort level, is what I'm trying to say. And yet to be broken out of habit, even with some socks and some panties as in underwear, is to know something more has to be there. Because even to pack a bag, say to even go somewhere, because see, the reason why I'm saying the habit as in the socks and panties, as in something is off in the play with all this, you do to be a young child, they like routine and habit. All right? And yes, it might in fact slip their mind, the panties and socks. But once again, to go nowhere with those things is to possibly ask, where did you in fact go? Were you still stuck at home? I'm in question. Because to be in a routine too much is to see panties and socks too much. And that would in fact be like the very first thing in which you would pack. Because remember, you're seeing it too many times in one day. Did I just repeat that 5 or 6 times? How many times did I just repeat that? Because this very thing needs to be scoped out as an examination. As what I'm doing right now. I'm examining a thing before the tape turns off. As in me not having much memory because I use up my camera, that 64 gigs, my camera, the long shot, my camera use a lot of gigabytes, which is why I'm using this device. But how could a child walk away without her panties and socks? As in leaving home. And yet even panties and socks is reassurance. Panties and socks are in fact reassurance. Because even those things give you comfort at night. Because see, to be in a weather like that and know you're going somewhere in the middle of the night is to possibly know your feet might in fact get cold. At night. Being in somebody's household or being somewhere else. And yet a young child mind might not completely think like that. And yet once again to cooperate with somebody else as in being told what to do is to do something right. And yet it's still something is off. Something is off. The panties and socks is off more than anything. The panties and socks is off more than anything. They are. Would an abductor tell a young girl to bring her socks? Because see, abduction sometimes includes molestation as well as sometimes being trampled on, as in being killed face down by some crazy sick lunatic. And yet to find her with a young child, even in the middle of the night, say on Valentine's Day, going into Valentine's Day, is to in fact, you might in fact go down in that young girl's panties in the form of getting off a grown man. Right? And so if you done did that type of thing, many a time, say an abductor supposedly, if this man did that type of thing, he would still be the same type of individual to tell a child to pack her panties and socks. I'm thinking, because I'm thinking if a man is a real pedophile or abductor that like to kidnap and take kids, more than likely he's going to tell her to grab some panties and socks to go with that very thing. Because remember, some grown men that are in fact pedophiles and abductors, they like to get off even on young children's panties. It's a sickness. It's a form of mental sickness, illness. And so to not tell that young child, as an abductor himself, to not tell this young child to pack her own panties and even socks, but panties more than anything, is to know something else could have in fact went down that night before she even left out the door, if she even left. Because see, pedophiles or children abductor, even he would know possibly the game, as in the turmoil, as in sick as it is to have a child pack her bag with panties and socks, even if he's going to take her with him, as in leaving and drifting off into another city or something in that manner. Because see, young children have even been found alive years later, right? And yet they were found living in somebody's home and sometimes trying to escape other people's home. And yet even in that, them children had on socks and underwears. Possibly not all, but I'm sure the majority. And yet to be an abductor is to, in fact, if you're going to guide a child in abduction, is to in fact tell that young child to pack her panties as well as socks. Because remember, you done seen so many children. If you're an abductor, you done seen so many children wear those very things, such as the undergarments. So why would you, being a child abductor, in fact not tell her to pack those very things in her bag if you guided her along the way over so many days? That in itself stands in question, because I stand in question of that, because if this young child was spending the night even over her grandmother's or her aunt and uncle house or whoever close family that lived nearby, if she was standing over there, at what time of the day did this young child say possibly pack her bag even then and forget things such as her panties and socks? The FBI should question her grandmother, grandfather, as well as aunts and uncles who live nearby, or any other individuals in which this child have in fact spent the night over, to see was there any time that a young age of degree have in fact forgot her panties as well as her socks, or one or the other. They need to investigate even this small detail, because to question that, as in her spending the night over somebody's house and forgetting those two items, is to know she's prone to in fact forget those items. And yet if she never has, is to once again say that somebody in fact planted this bag in the room of they packed the bag for her, to purposely make those items look missing, as in them pulling those items out as away from the bag, to possibly not tell on themselves, as to go completely undiscovered. And so I'm wondering once again, when I look at this bag, as in completely scope it out, who else house did Asia go over to say possibly spend the night or spend a matter of days, and yet once again possibly could have forgot her panties as well as socks? See, if you want to go small, as in dig very deep, let's go very small and dig very deep. I got that type of mind to go all the way in on the individual, whether they like it or not. See, I think somebody in fact packed this young child's bag for her in the process of, say, getting rid of her, even killing her, and yet was completely careless in it. As in, they didn't just make one mistake, but they in fact made multiple mistakes. As in, sometimes, yes, you can purposely pull out stuff, but sometimes you can make a mistake as well, even in planning. Because remember, to be an imperfect individual is to oftentimes do things in that manner of imperfect, where you made a plan and you actually messed up somewhere, even in the plan. I told you, I'm willing to scope some stuff out in the pieces. Let's dig deep. Let's dig deep over these matter of days of somebody supposedly packing a bag. Like, yeah, right. That little girl ain't packed that bag. Somebody packed that bag for her. And possibly on top of that, murdered her. Possibly in the middle of the night, talking about she packed her bag. But she didn't take her panties and socks, despite seeing it so much. And yet even the grandmother would know if the young girl has a habit of not packing her panties and socks. Yes, the grandmother would know. Whoever this young girl done took the time to spend the night a lot over, say, other family members' houses, trust and believe they would know for themselves of when she in fact didn't have panties. Because see, I said a grandmother would know, a grandfather and an auntie and uncle would know if a young child packed their bags, because if she wasn't allowed to, say, run her own bath water, that means whoever house she spent the night over, even if it's family, as I just stated, to practice something at home is to not do it alone at another person's house, such as a grandmother, aunt, uncle, grandfather's house. And so if you're not allowed to run your own bath water at home, that more than likely is to be told by the mother or the father that when you go over your grandparents' house or your aunt and uncle house, they have to in fact run the water for you. So as you're standing there, possibly getting undressed as they're running the water, is for a grandmother, grandfather, aunt, uncle to discover that young child, you did not even pack your panties. And not only that, you didn't pack your socks. Where are your panties and your socks? A grandmother will scope this out more than anything. A grandfather as well, but a lot of times they don't really take it upon the time to run their granddaughter. They might run their grandson's bathwater, but a lot of times grown men don't do that sort of thing for, say, young girls. Especially a grandfather run her bathwater. A grandmother would do that. But see, a grandmother has the awareness. Grandmothers are keen on awareness, let me tell you. They can scope out some stuff in which even they ain't telling. I'm sure that grandmother probably knows some stuff and ain't telling. I'm saying she can probably sense it in her gut, a vibe. If the little girl was standing even amongst a grandmother and she took her clothes off, and say the next day or even that night, if this was a habit practiced over to the grandmother house, then the grandmother has to do the same thing of making the child's bath, as in drawing her bath before she go to bed. And yet the grandmother would in fact see that the little girl didn't pack panties for that night to get in bed. Because some grandmothers sit and talk with their grandchildren while they're in the bathtub. Remember, they're visiting. So sometimes grandmothers stand there, and sometimes not all the time, but some grandmothers do stand and talk to their grandchild as they're preparing to get into the bathtub. And so to see is to know. The grandmother herself, to see is to know, man, child, did you forget your panties for the night? You got to remember to always put your panties in your bag because you're a young girl now. That's what grandmothers do. They point that thing out. They don't just let their grandchild go without her panties. Sometimes grandmothers would in fact drill in your head because you're a young girl and you forgot your panties. You got to always remember to pack your panties. And a young child would in fact remember that by an adult individual telling her that. Say over and over if it's been multiple times of her packing her bag and say forgetting her panties or even her socks. If the aunt or even the uncle, I can see the aunt more so if she spent the night over there, same situation of what I spoke on about the granny. The aunt would in fact possibly see that she didn't have no panties. Because see, even these family members can walk in on a young child going to the bathroom by accident and notice that the child doesn't in fact have panties on. Even the aunt will do that by mistake. Or sometimes aunties say, can I come in? And they want to look in the mirror to say possibly put makeup on or whatever as they're standing there talking to the young child that say she peeing on the toilet and see that in fact the young child doesn't have panties on. And sometimes the auntie will question her, where's your panties at? And she said, oh, I forgot them. Then the auntie will make it a point to remember. The auntie will make it a point to make her remember, you know what? Don't leave home without your panties. It's not ladylike to not wear your panties. And so that's where I stand in question about these panties. Because to go over people's house enough to spend a night is to know that a habit is even driven in that. Leaving undergarments. Or possibly not leaving them. I'm going to question that even more. It's not, see, the point is not to make people pissed off. People get pissed off. And yet, once again, if it was to come to the light as in a matter of fact, after, say, some of these videos, not just mine, but other people putting out information that make people pissed off, what if some of this information was in fact truth and it came to the light based upon what some of us are in fact saying? What if the police sat somewhere in their car and listened to what I said and listened to multiple people on video say certain things, and we say stuff out of our mouth to help them in the investigation and say they possibly solve it? Then the individuals that's sitting there pissed will more than likely look stupid. And I said that before. See, you can be part of something and yet leave your emotions at the door. Because to try to solve a crime case is to do just that. Although your heart feels connected to that young child being missing, you got to understand how things is to be taken. You got to yourself as in emotional control. To get on this video and sit crying and whining and going off about the young child missing and yet not use logic and reasoning skills and saying the examples of what could have happened is to know something could in fact be wrong with me. Or I shouldn't even be here doing this, because to be too emotionally connected to something is to never get nothing done. And that's what's wrong with the majority of Americans in the first place. They're too emotionally attached to things in the realm. They can't even see things properly, logic enough to even step to something. To say, you know what, I'm going to take my time to sit down to be a part of this process and leave my emotions outside of the door. That's how real business people operate. They leave their emotions out the door, outside of the door, in order to get things done. That's why some people are in fact fired from their job, because they can in fact contain their own emotions, as in standing still doing a job properly without letting emotions block that very thing of what you're doing. If you want to get done what you said you want to get done, and helping to find something such as an individual that was 9 years old that came up missing, you would take it upon yourself any time of day, sit down, cast your emotions to the side to try to help figure this out. That's what business people do. I'm a very individual, very like-minded with business individuals, to say, you know what, I can't let my emotions, even crime investigators can't do that. Nothing would never get solved. Look at OJ Simpson in that situation, how that happened. OJ Simpson was a part of that. Yes, we know. The man was possibly more likely a part of that very thing, right? And yet, some individuals, more than others, got too emotional in the sense of, I'm saying emotionally involved in the sense of not being able to look at things. What is the word I want to call it? Sometimes you can let your emotions block you from seeing the very thing of which it stands. To do that is a lost cause. That's how missing people can go completely missing for years on end and never found and discovered, because emotional individuals don't want to take the time to question the very thing of which looks suspicious. That in the process is a problem in the form of the fashion of examination, is what I'm trying to say. Because even the prosecutor can't step into a courtroom and say, sit in front of the parents and be too emotionally attached to say, you know what, I'm not going to ask them this or that. I'm not going to ask the parent this or that because they're a parent. Well, why not? Everybody else parent is being asked, and some children is coming to be found laid to rest over the fact that their mother or father in fact murdered them, and yet now everybody want to jump over the case, jump on the case as in on a bandwagon and say, well, I kind of sense that. Well, to sense something is to say, as in to try to help to know, as in to gain pieces, is gathering information together. Come on, common sense is just real. If you are a proper business individual, you leave your emotions outside the door. And they do work, as in get it done for what is supposed to be done for the day. All I'm trying to say, that's why some individuals can in fact keep a job, is because that very thing. They're too highly emotional. Flipping off for every little thing of, oh, such and such said this, so it just put me out of my element because they said that. Well, if you were a real live spoken individual in the form of business, you would let that very small thing, petty thing go and focus on the very job at hand of what you need to do, even in a search and find and rescue, such as a missing person or a missing child that might have went missing and might be dead. Some people hate when you say that the young 9-year-old child being missing for almost going on near 20 years, and yet we're not even close to that yet, but almost a few years off. They hate to say when you say, you know what, she might in fact be dead. There's all type of possibilities in all this. And yet to stand here speaking on it is to be a real life business individual. To take it all the way there, I fear none, as in taking it all the way there in realm of the questionables. And yet once again, to be too emotionally attached, as in the realm of, oh my gosh, I can't put my emotion to the side, is to know that in itself can pose a problem. You can completely sit still and not end up anywhere in life. I'm saying older individuals, much older than me, because many of them seem to be the ones that have the problem when you speak out and say stuff. To get too caught up in emotion is to land you nowhere in life. Because you can't allow old things that somebody pulled up to be in fact stated upon. If they can't be stated upon, then in a sense, a child will never be found, because you're closing it out too soon. Let people dig and search, as in the possibility to see what can in fact come, instead of trying to shut them down in the realm of them saying certain things that could possibly be there. What if it later came out that somebody in the family played a part in all this? Once again, those individuals that are too highly emotionally strong would in fact be looking stupid. And I'm not trying to sound harsh. I'm just stating it for what it is. You don't take the time to go questioning this individual and that individual that stand outside of the house. You got to question the house within. How was the day-to-day affair within that house? How gentle was that child in fact treated? How much of a latchkey child was that individual? When it came to packing their bag to go to events or even to spend the night, Who in fact packed their bags? Was it somebody else outside of themselves? Even when they pack their school uniform, we could see a young child doing that, but yet in still sense, when it comes to neatness and a child representing the parent, we know sometimes, in fact, that child might not, in fact, pack that bag. Unless, say, the parent folded the clothes for the child to help them put the matters in the bag. Can't bypass these questions is what I'm trying to say. That in itself sounds leery in itself, the detail. And once again, to be a full adult is to take these very things for what they are. These are adult-like questions. And yet to act like a young child, as in the petty nature of not wanting to face certain things, as in the revealing, is to know that you, the individual, or various individuals, are in fact prone to have a problem. As in the issue itself, you yourself trying to stop these very questions from coming out. Because once again, it's only the public that can help the police resolve these things. And if the public don't want to take it there, as in questioning that house itself in a deep observance, going room to room mentally to try to put the pieces together, people want to stop that, is to know this girl might never be found. And me, I start to have an attitude with that, because the public is in a sense responsible for even that. To not play your part is to allow an individual to completely go missing and just be missing for years, because you don't want to face the fact of what could possibly have happened, even in the four walls of her home. See, adult-minded individuals are once again able to face that, as in the pulling back of layers to try to scope and see. And yet people with a petty childlike mind are not able to face these facts. That's what's wrong with the world today. People don't want to face reality, which is why we got all type of trauma and chaos all around us. You wanna find out why society is so messed up? Well, blame society itself. It's because people are not playing their part to examine enough to see. And yet when other individuals are in fact playing their part enough to see, other people are trying to stop them in the question, in the realm of the area of the question of what could possibly have happened even at home of a young 9-year-old child that was afraid of dogs, afraid of the dark, and afraid of other things as irrational fears that don't make sense, as well as not wearing a coat knowing you can meet hypothermia. Somebody has an issue in me wanting to question, and that is in fact their own problem. And for me, I'm not trying to be mean and nasty, but don't you want the child to come home? So many individuals, so many of y'all claim and state that you want the child to come home, and yet you don't act like it. Because to want somebody to really come home is to take it all the way there within the house. Remember, to start at a root cause is to walk from that thing outward. I'm saying to do a search and find is to start within the four walls of the house and expand outwardly. The police has already did that, but once again, we need to go back. What in fact would set a child off to want to leave a house if she even left, and yet more than likely she didn't leave? That's what I'm trying to say. So people want to sit and say, well, there could in fact be abuse at home. Okay, so you know that there could be in fact abuse, but you don't want to stand and question what the abuse was? And yet when others want to sit and question, you want to shut them down? I saw that on Reddit. People were saying, oh, there was possibly abuse. And they started going into realms of what could possibly, and people were shutting them down. You don't do that type of thing, which is why I'm right here on video where you're live enough to see me. Yes, you're live enough to see me. I'm live enough to see myself because I'm staring back in my own reflection in this camera. Enough to say, if you want to know what in fact happened in the house, is to go in the four walls of that house without stopping people and without other people stopping you to scope in that house. Because that's the only way a child is going to fact be found. To not allow somebody to be scoping in somebody's house, as in a mother, father, brother's house, is to know the child might not never be found. Because remember, the house is where she come from. That's the root, as in a cause of this whole situation. This whole situation playing out has a root. And yet what in fact is the root? It's the house. It's the environment she grew up in. She chose to sleep in at night and possibly run away from. And so to know that there was in fact a root is to possibly be guided by that root, as in where you lived and grew up in the household. So once again, you go in reverse by questioning that household. You stop looking all outside the four walls of her house and stop looking at the school, and you start looking within her house. That's what true purebred business people do. The ones that put their emotion to the side for a little bit to say, you know what, I know I'm an emotional being. I got emotions, right? But I know that I need to get this done in the question. I can't sit here sobbing on full-blown camera, blowing out sniffy tears and tissue hanging everywhere. Said, oh my gosh, Asia Degree, come home. That is not helping to resolve a matter. What in fact helps resolve a matter is to plant yourself once again right there and question the house. From here on out, I'll be questioning that young girl's house. I don't have a chance, because remember, didn't they say black children are not given enough attention, and yet wants to look at my skin tone, my skin, right? What am I when you look at my skin? What does America in fact consider me to be? In American society, wouldn't they call me black? So to call something now that is to say that black children are not given enough attention is to allow somebody black themselves take matters in their own hands, as in describing the detail. Because if nobody else want to do the very thing for you, say the parents are upset because they weren't given enough time and attention to the detail of what could happen in this child being lost or undiscovered or whatever, taken in the middle of the night, abducted, it's to let somebody that had the same color as you to speak this very thing out, as in the possibilities of what could have in fact went wrong, even in your household. To play a part is to play it just precisely in the form of the gather of information where people feel black missing children are not giving enough attention. To play a part specifically is to step right here on camera, to have the same skin tone as that young child and say everything you're thinking, which could possibly be a possibility even in the four walls of her house, as in to map it out, even that house. I'm sure that house got locations in it in which ain't even being spoken of. Supposedly it was a small house. I scope out everything, layer to layer. Good evening. This ain't the nightly news. No, it ain't. And yet to get on YouTube is to just go there. We got to stop, as Americans, we got to stop being afraid to face reality. I think that is all to be said. Quit being afraid to face reality, because reality is all around us. It's all along, all around us. Every other day, a young child is being snatched. And I need to study the statistics on that. How many times in a day is a child, in fact, going missing? Statistics will show you, as in point and guide you to that, right? And so many people don't even want to face that. Because in a sense, it's almost as if they became desensitized enough to not to see it. To say, you know what? Oh, I got a piece of paper in the mail that says such and such was missing from my city. Let me Google that and see what happened. People don't do that. They don't want to face reality. And yet reality stands right in their city. Because remember, to have one child go missing in your city and have it be reported all over the news, right? As in them missing, and even Amber Alerts going off and ambushing you. It's to know once again your very own child could come up missing. That's why this sort of thing is very vital and important, as in not letting it go blind, as in the blind. Because see, at any moment of the day, even individuals in which they're living in cities, and that has yet to happen. Remember, every city is in fact on the radar of it being prone to happen. Even somewhere not that far away from you, say up the street, your own street. The individual, one that's afraid to face reality, this sort of thing can happen somewhere even on your block, where your own child could in fact almost be taken or close to being taken. That's why it helps to not escape reality for too long, and not get mad when people like me present certain information that is almost close to home as being almost evidence. Because to read too far into something is to show the very thing of which it is science. Dear Discovery, as in the Discovery Channel. Check that out as well, Discovery Channel. You know your way there. But anyway, I'm going to end this video, because this whole case spells nothing more than vacancy. That young child may or may not have been being loved, as in being mistreated. Not treated the way that she was supposed to be on a day-to-day basis. I like to go in people's house. Sometimes to go too far in people's houses to get put out. And yet maybe sometimes you should. Because sometimes to go too far in somebody else's house is to understand the definition of what could possibly stand there, even from a distance. You're going all the way in, scoping that house from afar. It's to get put out. Trust and understand. If I stand right here on this device which has internet, and I scope out Asia Degrees house for which it stands from a distance, standing right here as you scoping me out right now, if I was to turn the tables, twist it around, and look deep in the four walls of Asia Degrees house, as in trying to piece information together step by step, I'm sure there is a science right there that awaits, that police possibly have not in fact discovered, as in an unseen object. Possibly many of them, various objects unseen. What could possibly meet the naked eye, and yet even I spoke on that in the realm of the black light, the black UV crime light, going in a house, scoping it out. Sometimes you can go wall to wall and find certain evidence you never thought you would have possibly found. So to take a young individual like me that's completely going maxed out and speaking on these things is to never give up and to find out. In the room of finding out what happened. Examining somebody's house, and yet they don't even in fact know you're doing it, because remember, you're far away looking into the matter of the situation of what could possibly happen. I go blog to blog. Reddit is my thing right now, searching on this Asia degree, trying to figure out what other people are speaking on. And yet once again, to shut people down over what they're saying that the parents could have possibly done is to never configure anything. That sort of thing leads the whole case to a standstill. Because even police, I'm sure, is questionable, even in the parents. Yes, they are. That type of thing they ain't gonna never release to mass media. Why would they do that? Because see, to put out that you're FBI police and question even the parents, although they've been cleared through polygraph testing, there's people that know how to pass even tests like that, right? Right? So police could still be investigating and pinpointing, looking at the parents as being suspect, and yet they're not going to release that, because to release information too soon in that form and fashion that you're looking at the parents is to possibly allow them individuals to skip town. People got to pay attention. They don't use their logic wise enough. A police can sense that parents did something, and yet they can't really go into the four walls of a house even with a warrant, because there's a certain way you got to even go at them parents at an angle, being police, and discovering information that aligns with what you're trying to actually put together. You can't be putting that on the news that the parents are in fact the prime suspect, is what I'm trying to say. Police can't even if the police feel and sense that the parents did this very thing, as in possibly killed this young child or even took her somewhere, right? They can't say the parents out loud, because the parents would in fact leave town. The parents could possibly board a plane, get on the plane, and probably go to Mexico